Let me show you the very first game I ever played. It was a pirated version of Alley Cat from IBM. I even found the same pirated version I had. So it has skylines, and I even added some shaders to make it look like it's curved because it's on a CRT monitor. Okay, I'm gonna start with the easiest setting here because the game never ends actually, but as you go on, it's gonna make the setting more and more difficult anyway. This is one of the old games you can't win and can't even quit. There's no exit from it. You need to restart the computer. And this is how I played. Oh, it was originally a CGA game, so it featured 4 colors from the mind-blowing maximum of 16. But I only had a monochrome monitor. This is also Sega monitor. I mean, I'm emulating one. It was the same when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Ooh. Oh. So the point here is you start from this alley. You have to jump on the smaller trash cans so you can go higher. You can catch these mice here, but they can also throw you back. And you can jump in windows, and it's gonna put you in a random game. In this particular one you need to eat the fish without being killed by these electric eels or without drowning. It's a really complicated and long game.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Does it actually end, or does it just
it never ends, so that's why it can be long, but it's also very complex, so you never really get tired of this thing as a kid.
Oh, you drowned.
Yeah.
How old were you when you played it then?
Oh, I was in kindergarten. I don't even remember how old I was. This particular PC I played on, it was a Hungarian clone of an IBM PC. It was called Proper 16. And I'm actually emulating even the shitty phosphor monitor I had because it had a program burnt into it. So I had to look at that program every time the monitor was turned off. Oh. Wasn't really paying attention. This was one of the most important levels. This is the one that makes the game even more difficult. What I really liked in this game was that it was kinda complex. It wasn't just the same thing on every map, and it was very challenging. Where you entered these apartment buildings, these rooms, there's usually a broom in there, and it's gonna chase you if you don't make dirty footprints on the floor. It can't kill you though, it just wants to push you out the window or push you in harm's way.
Yeah.
That's it. It doesn't even keep track of your life, so it's really hard to tell how much life do you have left.
Okay, so there is a limit then.
Yeah, there is a limit. Yeah. But it's gonna just throw you back to the intro screen and you can start all over again.
Alas.
Yep. And this happens when you press escape. It pauses the game. It's a pun. Pause the game.
Oh, I'm just old enough to remember a day when Escape didn't actually quit anything. You had to use Q.
Yeah, Q, Alt, X, all these things, but none of them works here. You have to disable. You have to turn off the computer or reboot it.
Yeah.
I even looked up the original Atari version, but I don't really like it. I mean, it had more color and it had more decent sound effects, if you can call the Atari sound chip decent. But hey, it wasn't just a PC speaker.
Yeah.
But this was the game I played with. This was the game I played with as a kid, so this is authentic for me.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Obviously it'd be different, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You say you pirated it.
Yeah.
Would that have been the norm then?
Yeah,
I assume.
it totally was. Not just because I was a kid, but because Hungary, we didn't have an internet access back then, and also there was literally no game market here in Hungary. You couldn't just walk in a store and buy a game. You had no other chance. Yay! I scored.
Common state, wouldn't it, as well? So.
Oh, say that again, please, because I couldn't hear you over the PC speaker music.
I was just saying, obviously it's come out of a communist state fairly recently at that point as well, I'd imagine, so you've got that to deal with as well, in terms of just culture and media just not being available quite literally.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, especially stuff like this.
Yeah. How long was it? Well, whenabouts did you really start seeing the games industry grow then?
When we really entered the game industry in the market, well, we had movies already when this game was already available as a pirated version here, so we already had access to American movies and series. I was already watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the TV, but the computer was, the computers were lagging behind. Almost no one had computers. I only had access for one while I still was in a kindergarten because my grandma had one from his job.
Yeah.
I mean from her job, sorry. Yeah, this is the same reason there's a program burnt into the background. These old phosphor monitors tend to do that. Well, the first actual game I bought to myself, not online, but in a store, I don't even remember. I have a shitload of original games on CDs, but it was already really late 90s, almost the beginning of the year 2000 or something like that. Before that, you just had no other choice just to pirate it.
Yeah. What kind of stuff did you? What became available at that point then? Did it become? Was it older stuff at that point, or was it games that were around that era that you saw?
Well, this game is even older than me. Not too much,
Yeah.
but it's a little bit older than me. I think we had access to games a little bit later, but not as much as you would expect. I mean, I played Doom with the server version just after it came out. The same happened with Quake 1. But before that, yeah, we had access to them a little bit later than Western Europeans.
Yeah.
I wanted to say this part is difficult, but I just literally stood in one place and I won that thing just by doing that. Now.
There's a slight delay between what you're seeing and when I see it. So.
Yeah, I know. I already realized it. And sometimes it's really hard to hear what you say because this PC speaker music is just way too loud.
Yeah. Yeah. I did wonder if it might be when I listened to the stream for a bit. What did you get into first then? Like PC games Did that really stick, or would you say it was consoles?
Oh well, I had access to both of those. Actually, I even played on Commodore 64s. That's also a home computer, of course, but it's it's not a
Yeah.
PC as it is. The C64 I played with a lot. It wasn't mine, so I played it. One of my neighbors had it, but I played a
Yeah.
lot with that on that. I think that was the first I played with, and after that came this PC at my grandma's place. But yeah, it was the same considering it wasn't my own. It wasn't in my own room. It wasn't the own place. I had to go to visit my grandma to play with it. But for Christmas, I oh boy, I'm gonna die. So for one Christmas, I got a Nintendo clone, and it was a clone as well. It wasn't the original European NES released to the European market. You know, that grey box thing. It was a
Yeah.
Famicom clone, the clone of the Japanese thing.
Yeah, there was a Japanese one. It was actually fairly decent, obviously, from what I remember.
Yeah, the original Famicom is even better than the European version,
Yeah.
but these clones were basically the same. The only good thing in these clone games, and I died in the meantime, was that they came with pirated games as well, and they could squeeze in like 100 games in one cartridge. It wasn't really 100 game. It was more like a dozen different games, but with different
Yeah, 20
settings.
versions of the
Yep.
same game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the
So
old school way of doing it, yeah.
but that's how I played Super Mario Brothers first.
Yeah.
And after that, I was really into console games. I played a lot with Nintendo. I even participated in one of the game shows here in Hungary
Yeah.
about Nintendo games as a kid. But I think I played with PC more, especially later when I had my own one, my own PC. When I had my own PC, I played with games like Mortal Kombat, Doom, that era.
Yeah.
The first Doom and the first Mortal Kombat, of course.
Yeah.
But even before that, when I played with this game, I learned the basics of MS-DOS. I made ASCII art because it didn't have any graphical programs on it. We didn't have
Yeah.
Windows back then. Not even. Oh, I almost had the last fish. Not even 3.1. But I learned how to animate them. I made ASCII arts, ASCII files, and made a batch file which just showed them, and I just post them. So you could just make them animate like if you would do that on a paper,
Yeah. So yeah, you
flipbook thing.
basically, yeah.
But even when I had my own PC, we still pirated those games. I consider myself really lucky because nowadays everyone says that kids nowadays they're just born into the internet and computer, and that's exactly like that. But my father always said that I was born into it as well. But that doesn't go for my generation as a whole. It was just my luck because I had really early access to this MS-DOS IBM PC clone. So that's why I was really interested in it as a small kid.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it was even the same for me in the UK. I mean, obviously we were a bit further ahead at the time, but I think my dad was a graphics designer, so we had a computer that was fairly capable, and I would have been using it since I was like 4. So, and that was kind of the era just before, well, a little while before the internet really took off or anything like that. So it was still at that point where a computer was really isolated and that kind of thing, and didn't have this mass culture that you've got now. So yeah, so I was playing games on that. So used to buy them from, well, I used to get magazines from physical store that had like demos and things like that on it on floppy disk.
Oh yeah,
So I used to play that kind of
we
stuff a
didn't
lot.
had magazines with floppies because they were considered really expensive. We had computer magazines. I even collected them. I still have a really huge collection of computer magazines. That was the first sign that I moved into my girlfriend when I moved that collection with me.
Yeah.
Oh
So
boy.
yeah, it's, even though I mean, there's not a massive age difference between us in a way, but
Yeah.
I would say that the generation that we're in, because reality is we're in the same generation in a way, it really has seen the change from that kind of, like I say, isolated computer experiences to the kind of
Yeah.
networks and things that we have now, and exactly what we're doing now, streaming on Twitch.
Yeah.
That kind of thing is just completely unthought of. You wouldn't even begin to think of that idea.
Yeah.
Like in the mid to early 90s, it was just
Computers,
beyond imagining.
yeah, computers were a community thing back then as well because it was so rare. Everybody wanted to visit a friend with one, but almost everyone who had a computer, every user who had a computer wasn't just a user. Just like in the first Tron movie, they called the programmers the users. Back then,
Yeah.
everybody who was a user had root privilege, or they knew how to program, or just basically operate programs.
Yeah, it was at a point that you
Not-
had to
not like
make it what you
nowadays.
wanted to. So,
Working in
really
IT, and
choose what you wanna do.
sometimes I'm baffled that our new users don't even know about really basic stuff like what's a file extension, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I deal with that on a daily basis. You know.
Oh boy, I swear I didn't suck at this game. It is hard. It's a bit hard to pay attention to the game because it's a really hard game
Yeah.
and talk in the same time.
When did you last play them?
Very good question. I don't know. I was probably 5.
And you haven't touched it since then.
Nah,
I'd say you're doing
not
alright for that
recently.
then. But I suppose you've got your life's worth of experience in games at this point, haven't you? So, would you say that is this the game that really got you playing games, or would you say it was something else that kind of? that really
This was
got
one
you
of them.
interested?
This was definitely one of them. I had other games on that computer as well, but this was the very best one on the PC. I had favorite games from C64 as well. Oh, piracy on C64 computers back then. That was a really funny thing. You know, you could store data on tapes, like the old cassette tapes used for music as well. It was exactly the same thing. So
Yeah.
they broadcasted programs in not just pirate radios. They even broadcasted illegal programs in official radio channels. Like they said, this is
yeah.
for C64 users. Start recording now because we are sending you a game. And if you recorded it, you could play it on your home computer.
Yeah. It's weird to think it was like that.
Oh, and you had to know how to operate this thing if you wanted to play, because for this game I had to learn how to handle MS-DOS. It wasn't that hard, but for C64, all that loading time, oh boy, that was a pain in the ass. Yeah, that's why I really liked when I first had access to that Nintendo console, that replica, because it was so much easier. You just powered it on, just smashed the cartridge into it beforehand, and it worked.
Yeah.
And that's it. And of course it had superior graphics compared to these games on PC. I remember how the first PC games struggled to imitate the console games. Like Nintendo already could make platformers like Super Mario Brothers with scrolling background, and PC platformers were still like you need to go from screen to screen, and most of them utilized only 4 colors in the same time from a mind-blowing palette of 16 colors.
Yeah. Yeah. PC was a lot closer to where consoles as such were probably about 10 years before. So it was like Odyssey and Odyssey 2 and stuff like that, so it was much closer to that kind of
Not like now, when the consoles are nothing else, just well, it's a cheap, not really cheap, I mean, because the console itself is not cheap. It's just a PC, it has exactly the same hardware. The same guys are making the hardware for it. It just customized for playing games, but
Yeah.
it doesn't even worth it because I don't want to start with the Yahtzee PC Gamer Master Race thing, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Back then it wasn't like this. The console games were actually superior.
Yeah. Well, I'd still the consoles have the potential to be superior because certainly the way they're designed, obviously they're purpose built, and with the APIs in them are such a much lower level in terms of access to hardware, whereas with a Windows machine, obviously you've got to go through the OpenGL or DirectX APIs. You haven't got that direct access to hardware, which is why you see that massive change in console game quality across its lifetime. I mean, if you look at original Xbox 360 and PS3 games,
Hmm.
it's like crap compared to what's come out more recently with stuff like Last of Us and things like that, which are really good-looking games.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So in that sense, they have that over, but PC certainly in terms of hardware development is always going to be ahead. It's already ahead. It was ahead when those consoles were announced. So PS4 and Xbox One.
Yeah, but don't forget the consoles only came out with a specific set of hardware and with slight differences between versions, and it's way more easier to optimize stuff for them as for a PC. Nowadays, it doesn't really matter what kind of computer do you have if you only use it for browsing, because if you only use it for browsing the internet and Facebook, it doesn't really matter what you're using for. But if you are talking about games, it's not as hard as it was before because the game developers don't need to invent the wheel all over again. They have access to all those libraries, but still, if you want to optimize it, you have to think with different hardwares in mind. Just check what happens with Hulk and optimizing everything from Nvidia, and they don't really care about the other vendors in this field. But if you're a AAA company, you can't afford that.
Yeah.
And if we are not talking about handheld consoles, it's usually the AAA companies who make the really awesome games for consoles. At least for the two major hardcore gaming console and not the Nintendo platforms. Even before I had internet, dial-up internet, I remember that one, we had to trade these games on floppy disks.
Yeah.
Sneakernet.
I mean, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, what you mentioned about transmitting games across a radio station.
Yeah.
I find it funny that it's gone from that, like, that would have been, what, late 80s, early 90s, that
Yeah.
kind of thing, of just transmitting that across radio waves, of that kind of distribution of a game, to the past decade to 15 years of games solely being in retail stores on physical discs, and then it's gone back round to that kind of remote distribution platform with digital distribution
now with
over the
Steam.
internet. It's completely swung back round to that kind of thing. So I was really disappointed, actually. Disappointed is probably the wrong word. I had no issue with the way Microsoft presented the Xbox One of being purely digital distribution for games.
Yeah, that wasn't the problem. I had issues with other stuff they wanted to force, like you had to be online all the time. I mean, everybody knows you're online anyway, and you don't really. Everybody mentioned what happens if you don't have internet connection and you want to play a single player game. That's a valid concern, even though it's not gonna happen that frequently. But they just all these things like the always on Kinect, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, the Kinect I wasn't so fussed about, but I think it's one of the things where if you haven't got an internet connection, then why did you buy a console these days? Is what I would say. It's
Well,
kind of like, well, really, in reality, there should be one before the other. I'd expect somebody who buys a console to have an internet connection of some description. even if it isn't like always on or always available or something like that, I would expect it to some extent.
There's a very niche gamer player base who was really offended by the Xbox One announcement. American soldiers stationed outside the US, because they are usually Xbox players. They support their own console, you know, and they are the bro gamers playing with all those FPS games, Gears of War, Halo, stuff like that. But mostly in single player, because they don't have access to the internet where they're stationed most of the time, especially if they are in the front lines. But I won't say they are the target demographics for the console anyway. It's just another, you know, thing the media could mention.
It's an example of another potential issue with it, but those are outliers, like you say, rather than being what you'd expect of the market or the demographic in a way. What were the other games then? Because you say this is one of the games.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I had some other games I played on this computer. I haven't prepared them yet. There's one called Bushido. It was well, I don't know if I should call it a fighting game because it was so slow. I'm gonna show you a little bit later.
Yeah.
I
recognise the name. I think so.
And another one I played a lot is Digger. It was totally a clone of Dig Dug and Boulder Dash on C64. Yeah. I played with those games as well. Boulder Dash was one of my favorite games on the C64, but of course the most awesome game soundtrack I think goes for China Sisters on C64. Actually, that game is really controversial. I don't know if you know about it. Heard about China Sisters before?
China Sisters?
No, not China, Giana.
Oh, that's the one that's had a remake recently, isn't it?
Yeah, they had a remake on Nintendo DS and even had a 3D remake on PC now.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the original game is really controversial because it was banned. Because the original creators, I think some German dudes, wanted to prove that they can make a Mario clone on Commodore 64. And they actually made a very decent game. It wasn't just like the original Mario game because it wasn't as fast as a Nintendo could do it. But it had the same platforming elements. It could scroll the screen, which was really unheard of on that degree. It was a blatant copy though, so I really understand why they pulled them off the shelves. But it had a cult following because of that, you know, because it was banned. It was the forbidden fruit. Everybody wanted that. And everybody had pirated games here anyway, so they had that game. So it had a really good reputation. But the game itself was good, and the soundtrack, as I said, it's just awesome. I really like the C64 sound chip. It's called a SID chip. I like chiptune in general, but the C64 is one of my favorites. Oh. Okay, I just failed at this game. I just gonna pretend I'm playing it and chat with you about things.
What's your favourite game then?
Favorite game on one platform? And from what era?
If you have one.
My very favorite game, and now?
Yeah.
Well, it's really hard to tell. You know, I played a lot with Hawken, as you know, and I'm really invested in that game. So I would say that that's the game that kept me occupied in the last years the most. But before that, I considered myself a Quaker, and I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about the FPS game. Oh boy. But you know what? One time when they asked about my ethnicity and religion, I actually answered Quaker. But before that, Well, my most favorite games on PC would be XCOM, the first one. I really enjoyed the
Yeah,
remake as well. As a kid, I was making up sequels in my head for games I liked, and I kinda imagined that game before they made it, like years before, a lot of times, and I was okay with it, how they did it. But the
yeah,
original XCOM 1, the first one, that's just one of my favorite games. I spent years probably playing with that, not just hours.
yeah. I haven't played any of the XCOM games actually. I know at some point, so, but as I'm sure you have, I've got a massive Steam list of games to catch up on at some point. So
Oh yeah. I have a lot of Steam games. I realized I'm like the women from jokes when they say that they don't have anything to wear, they don't have any clothes to put on, and they have a closet full with clothes
yeah,
and shoes. We do exactly the same with Steam games. We always bitch that we don't have anything to play with, and yet we have a lot of games we we acquired when it was on sale and never actually installed it.
yeah,
Well, when I still pirated games, I had kind of similar issue because when I had a CD-ROM. Oh, by the way, I was a really early adopter of the CD-ROM and even a writer. So
yeah,
I made a lot of money writing CDs, burning CDs.
yeah,
Basically, that was my lunch money.
yeah,
That's why I had money for all those magazines I have.
yeah,
Oh, we didn't really had magazines with floppy attachments to it, but later on when CD-ROM was kinda everywhere, they made CD. They gave CDs with demos and everything to some magazines, not all of them, because there was a really old magazine here, one of the first one, which survived the longest, and they never had a CD. Everybody asked them to have one, but they never wanted one. They
yeah,
started as the original team who started that magazine. They started with a magazine called Computer World, and they featured old 8-bit home computers like C64 and such. So they started as a C64 and um, magazine, and later they switched to PC, and they featured both PC games and console games. And in the mid 90s, they had to split because the console community and the PC community wasn't really compatible even back then. They just had to make two different magazines.
yeah,
I remember I had a PC, I had a Nintendo, but I wasn't interested in all the other stuff in the magazine, and everybody was complaining that all these Sega games are taking up the precious space from the magazine, that we are not interested in Sega games.
yeah,
They kind of agreed with them. Most of the time, every good game came out to every platform. They had a port of, to some degree. Most of them sucked, but hey,
yeah,
they had one. I really like that magazine, and they went bankrupt when they couldn't compete with all these CD magazines, and
yeah,
one of those magazines just acquired the company and fired everyone. It's a sad story.
yeah,
I actually ordered both of those magazines, pre-ordered them, so they sent me a letter that instead of pre-ordering it for 1 year, both of them, I now have 2 year of 2 year membership for that magazine. Oh boy. So I started, exchanging games on floppy disks. We even snuggled some of these floppy disks with games into the primary school, and uh, what I wanted to say that later when the CD-ROMs came out and I could burn CDs, I started making my own little uh, uh, disk mags. Well, not an actual disk mag because it wasn't as fancy as a disk mag. I don't know if you heard about them.
Yeah.
It's not an actual magazine. It's not an actual, paper magazine. It was only released on a disk, first on a floppy disk and later on CD-ROM. But it usually featured a magazine-like program, an executable program, and a collection of different things like music, game demos, mods.
Yeah.
I made my own mod collections for Half-Life 1, for Quake 1 and 2. It was really hard to come by and acquire all these mods with the dial-up connection we had back then. So it was still easier to exchange them on a CD.
Yeah.
I remember I had a LAN party when I still lived with my parents. I was still in school, and we didn't have the internet back then. But one of my friends had a modem in his computer, so we just hooked it up to the phone, and we started, downloading mods, patches, some porn, the usual stuff, and we just forget about it. We just totally forget that it was still logged on, it was still downloading, and we went to sleep, and it was downloading all night, and we made a huge phone bill. And my father actually called a phone company claiming that we never actually had internet access, so it's probably false, it's not ours. And they actually gave him a refund.
Yeah.
I really like those old LAN parties I made. We still had CRT monitors, so it was a bitch to carry them over the city.
Yeah.
Because first I only... Yeah.
Yeah, you showed us a picture of one of them at one point, yeah.
Yeah, that was a later one. That actually... first I only organized it for my friends in the same city I lived in. But later on, when I was in high school, I went to high school to the capital. And most of my schoolmates were... Oh boy, I just ruined it. Steam just ruined it. I was streaming this game, so authentic, and Steam overlay just popped up. It ruined it. So when I was in high school, most of my classmates were from the capital, and I invited them over to LAN party, and they actually, visited maybe their computers, and one of them didn't even bother to organize ride for himself, so they didn't even bother to ask someone to help him out with a car or something. He just grabbed his computer, grabbed his CRT monitor, and he just traveled on a train by himself. When the train stopped, he first grabbed the computer, he ran with the computer off the train, he started shouting not so the train doesn't start without him, so he can run back for the monitor and do the same again. I think that LAN party was the one when Unreal Tournament came out, the first one.
Yeah.
That was a really fun one. I came from a Quake background, so I enjoyed Quake 3 more, but I also played a lot with the Unreal Tournament. I never gonna be able to show this game to its full potential to you because I keep dying. There are other rooms I wanted to show, but how do you like the critical assist logo I made
It's not sure about that.
on the stream?
Yeah.
NC art.
you actually do that as a proper ANSI then?
Nah, I just used the converter.
Yeah.
But the logo in the background, well, let me show you. That's an actual art, so it wasn't converted. It was actually made by an artist. I asked the guy to make one for me. Oh no! I died. So I think I can consider myself really lucky because I could play with these games, and that's why I fell in love with computers. I
Yeah.
think everybody from our generation started with these games, or not these games, but computer games. And I remember my father always telling me that I should stop playing with computer games because nobody gonna pay me for sitting in front of a computer. And look at me
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
I sit in front of the computer 8 hours a day just to come home and do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
We had a lot of awesome DOS games when I entered primary school, and we already had Windows on those computers. Well, Windows 3.1, so it wasn't really an OS. It was just a graphic file manager. You still had
Yeah.
to run it with DOS. I remember we had to paint national flags in MS Paint, and the teacher would grade it, but he graded it by not how you did it. I mean, uh, not how pretty it looked. He graded it like how lazy you were, because if you choose something really simple, like just an easy one like the Hungarian flag, which is just 3 colors, he actually counted the pixels, so
Yeah.
it's gonna be the same pixel. And if you made someone like the Brazilian flag, which was really hard, he just gave you the best grade because that was hard to pull off.
So
I
all you had
think
to do was try a really difficult one.
I think I went to. I did something not that difficult, but not as lazy as the Japanese flag. I think there is even a laser one. I don't remember which Arabian country is that, but their flag is just a plain green flag without anything. Most of the time in school, uh, in computer science classes, it was really boring for me. I mean, that part when we actually had to learn something, because I already knew that thing. Because I already learned how to use DOS when I was in kindergarten, so it wasn't a challenge for me. I was waiting until everybody else finished it so we could start playing.
Yeah.
Because my teacher was kind enough, he let us play. He even played with us. When I was bigger, he even played with Doom. He even played Doom with us in multiplayer. Oh, and my dad had a. Oh boy. My dad had a friend who was also a computer science teacher, and he was the one who always fixed my computer when I as a kid, broke it because I had to experiment with it, of course. So he was the one fixing it for me, and I think he gave me most of the games I really enjoyed. Like, I think he gave me Doom and Mortal Kombat, and he knew the cheat codes for Doom. He knew the invincibility and the ammo cheat code, but he never wanted to share it with me.
Yeah.
I was really pissed off. And when we played Mortal Kombat, because he played with me sometimes, he was a cheap bastard because he always used one character only, Raiden. Because in the first game, it had a move called Torpedo Dash, which was really simple to pull off, and it made a lot of damage. It was just uh, back forward, and he just spammed that. That was really cheap. I consider the time when I actually beat him for the first time. Uh, I don't know. That was almost like you know, like a challenge for me. I can now call myself an adult or something.
Rite of passage, yeah.
Yeah. I remember that the monitor I had was a little bit darker, so I should have set the gamma a little bit darker because I remember I couldn't see where the cat starts and the cheese ends on the screen. It was almost the same shade. These shaders, they do a pretty good job emulating the well, not really the scanlines because the scanlines here suck. They don't really they can't really emulate the old CRT monitor scanlines, but I really like the curvature they gave to the screen. But yeah, it's not exactly the same because, as I said, it was a CJ monitor for once, so uh, everything had a really cool glow to it.
Yeah.
I really enjoy playing not just with old games because from time to time I still play with old games and I really like the remakes and community made things like the Open Red Alert, but I also really enjoyed, at first at least, the retro games, but now they flooded the market with retro games. Every second game on Steam, it's an early access or an indie game, a pixel platformer or something with pixel graphics. They want to emulate 8-bit or 16-bit graphics, but they just make some gimmicky thing that looks like it's pixelated, but it doesn't look like it was made for a specific console platform back then. So it's it's kind of modern game with some pixel graphics. They're not talking about Minecraft because you know that's obviously 3D, but it still had a charm to it with all these blocky things. I'm talking about, well, I can't really name one of these because, but there are a lot of them. I mean, just oh, like Fast, the game you played. It's also very retro looking. It looks like an SNES game. Besides the fact that you can, you know, actually turn the thing in 3D.
Yeah.
The original console uh, probably never could have done that, even with all these fancy cartridges with 3D processors added to them. Like I think the SNES Star Fox had some additional hardware in the cartridge, so it can
Yeah.
actually use vector graphics,
Yeah, Donkey Kong did as well.
3D graphics without any textures on the
Yeah.
actual polygons. So they usually just not emulate, they just imitate the old school style, and I really enjoy those games who just do the extra mile and really make the game like it feels like an old school game. I played with two of these recently. One is Oniken. It plays like and feels like an original NES game, and it's just as hard as those games. So it's an actual hard NES game. It plays like Contra and a little bit of Ninja Gaiden because you only have a melee weapon, and it actually looks like if it was made for an NES. And the second one, I almost finished. When I first started playing with it, I almost finished every episode of it, and I lost my last life at the last boss, and it was probably the last form of that boss, so I was really pissed off. But that's also a very retro-looking game, and it has the vibe for it. It's called Muri, and it emulates an old CGA style um, um, side-scroller shooter platformer thing, just like the first two Duke Nukems. Actually, it
Yeah.
totally looks like the first two Duke Nukems if you played it on a CG monitor,
Yeah.
because it has the same shitty pink color everywhere. Not really pink, that magenta color CG monitors had usually. And I really enjoyed the really subtle things in that game. I mean, not just the fact that you have high score. Well, I mean, Um, some other games have score as well. Usually, not even console games, but handheld games or apps for phones. So it's not it didn't really die out, but back then almost every game had a score, even if it was totally unnecessary. Even Wolfenstein 3D had a score, and it made no sense whatsoever. But it was just a relic from the past, I think. So it has a
From the
score
arcade
system,
era, isn't it? Yeah.
and most of the things you can pick up are very stereotypical things like floppy disks and such.
Yeah.
Every game had to feature floppy disks as things you can pick up. Oh, another platform I really enjoyed on PC later, Jazz Jackrabbit, the first one. Oh, I have
Oh
to
yeah.
stream that one because it has epic music, literally epic,
Yeah.
because it was made by the same guys who, later became the Epic Mega Games.
Yeah, it was Cliff Blazinski who designed it. Yeah.
It had really awesome music.
Mm.
I played a lot with that game as well. So what I wanted to say that the game Mori, it's not just that it really nailed down these things. They really um, cared about the small details. Like when you first start the game, it's gonna ask you which version do you want to play, the smooth version with frame rate over the normal 30 frame rate, or only just half of it with frame skips, like old games had.
Yeah.
So it's actually very choppy when you play it.
User joined your channel.
Hello?
Hey, hey. And the controls are pretty normal for a game from that era, but what I wanted to say that I actually head out and read the development blog for that game, because when I played it I felt like the guy who made it really wanted to make the game stand out in respect of game design, because he used a really old school approach when, instead of making a tutorial, because nowadays almost every game has a tutorial, and some of them are really horrible, not because they're long and they don't actually show you the really important stuff, but because they usually break the fourth wall. So I really hate when they break the immersion, or just not really the immersion. Even if the game is real, I don't really care about that. But if they kill the atmosphere of the game by telling me which
Yeah.
button to press, because I can't really feel like I'm really there if somebody tells me that I should click on that thing, something like that. But in this game, it only shows you to press F1 when the game starts if you need to look up the controls, and that's it. And everything else is designed so it just feels natural to you. I don't know if you guys saw the video Egoraptor made about game design. I think his first animation in the series was about the Mega Man X first level, and
Yeah. I haven't watched any of his stuff actually. I need to.
the guy who made Muri followed the same principles. Like the first screen, you can't really go left, so you kinda figure out that most of the time you have to advance to the right, but you still can go left. The screen allows you, not like in Super Mario Brothers, and it just forces you to crouch because you can't go through a wall or force field, because there is a thing you have to shoot first, but it's lower than your gun, so you just crouch by yourself. You just figure it out, and later on you have to jump, but you already could jump because you already figured out probably that you have only two control besides the movement: jump and shoot. It's so simple, but there is a gap you can't really just jump over, so you kind of figure it out yourself that you have to hold down the jump button, and the more you hold it, the higher it will jump. I really miss this kind of game design. I mean, you can't really do that in multiplayer in a competitive environment without enforcing some MOBA or some similar stuff like they did it with Titanfall, because with Titanfall they kinda fused the single player and multiplayer elements together, and to some degree I kinda enjoyed it. At first it was really I think it was really confusing, because I couldn't tell if I'm actually playing against players, because when I first played beta I couldn't tell if someone is a player or someone is just an AI controlled enemy.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to tell, but when you're a noob to a game, it's everything happens so fast in an FPS.
Yeah.
So they kinda tell you what to do in that game, but modern multiplayer games that they just expect you to already know how to move in an FPS game, or if they have a single player campaign, they want to teach you how to use the guns in the single player skirmish before you start playing multiplayer. But I don't know if you could use the same rules of game design as these old games used, because it's just not the same. In 3D environment it's a bit harder, especially if there are other players trying to kill you. But I really enjoy the simplicity of that. No annoying tutorial popping up, no one telling you what to do. Another thing they did in that game was you realize you can jump on enemies, because there was on the end of the screen there was a gap you had to fall in, and there was an enemy at the bottom, so you just fell on it. It was scripted like that. The enemy was placed deliberately to that spot, so you just learn it yourself that you can jump on them. And they did the same with any enemy type they introduced.
Yeah.
So tell me more about this game. What's the purpose of it?
Oh yeah, you missed the beginning when I started it. Well, as you see, it's called. Oh, you probably if you see the title, you know it's called
Yeah,
Alley
it's-
Cat, and it takes place in an alley, and I'm a cat. So basically that's it. But there's actually a little bit more depth to it, because it's a bit complex game compared to other games when this came out. Well, you need to jump on these trash cans here. That's the first thing you need to do, and there are these cats pushing you back, and if that dog gets you, that's gonna kill you. And yeah, I just died. Game over. I just show you how to die. Anyway, you need to jump up, and you need to be careful, because they're throwing out different obstacles like phones and stuff. But what you want to do in this game is jump into open windows, so you can enter different rooms, and after you score a different score, it's no way to tell what's that score, because the game doesn't really shows your score or how many lives do you still have left. It's just that evil. It only shows you some stuff, like in some map it shows you how many mice you need to catch, stuff like that. It actually shows you when you pick something up that it worth some score, but it doesn't show you how many score in general do you have. But it doesn't really matter, because the game never ends actually. It doesn't have an ending.
Basically, the point is just to be a cat.
Yeah, well, yeah. After a certain score, there's gonna be a window with a female cat in it, and that one. And if you jump into that window, you need to play the most surreal minigame in this game. Not like the other games are not really surreal, like most of the time there is an inanimate broomstick following you, trying to kill you. But in this particular screen, you have to go up, so you shag that female cat. And every time you do this, it's gonna change the difficulty. So the game is going to be harder and harder over time. Uh, it's gonna give you less and less trash cans to jump on. The enemy is going to be, well, not really smarter, just faster. And the broom's gonna chase you not just randomly. It's gonna try to push you into obstacles that can kill you. But there are different rooms, and it puts you randomly in different rooms, and there are different goals. Like in this one I'm in just now, you have to push down a cage. So after the cage is down, you have to catch that little birdie. And in most rooms where there is a broom, it's gonna chase you if you don't do anything about it. But luckily you can just walk all over the floor, and by doing that you're gonna leave dirty footprints, and the broom's gonna be busy cleaning that up instead of following you. So it has no end whatsoever. You can't even exit the game. Yeah, you have to turn off the computer or reboot it. But compared to other games back then, the graphics were actually really nice. I mean, that cat almost looks like a cat. Just look at it. Just from a few pixels, they managed to draw a very believable looking cat.
Well, sometimes it looks like a spider or something kind of.
Nah, you have to use your imagination. Also, another thing about retro games, they almost forget about emulating the platform. They're emulating the game's graphics, but you're playing with these games on a totally different monitor now, with a totally different hardware underneath it. So it's gonna run way faster, of course, and it's gonna be crystal clear. You can see the pixels everywhere. So if you emulate the game nowadays, it's not the same when you played it actually on a CRT monitor. That's why I applied some shaders into this, but it's still not the same. Because when I played this, the CRT monitor wasn't so crystal clear about the edges of the pixels. It blurred it together, so it was a little bit believable. But another effect my monochrome phosphor monitor had is that everything had a really cool glow into it. Also, the thing with the pixel graphics, it's not that easy. Everybody who starts playing around with pixel graphics, they first think, oh, it's so easy because I don't really have to draw. I don't need talent for this, because it's not like it's gonna be an anatomically real cat. Nobody's gonna see if it's missing different parts, or it's not the detail. But in reality, it's kind of the opposite, because you're very limited because of the platform. It really limits you, and you have to draw something that looks like a cat, moves like a cat, and you can only use a certain number of pixels to do so. And even the animation frames are, for the main characters are usually more than for the enemies, but even for the main characters there is a limit. That's what I really like in demo scene. That's not about games. It has game competitions, but it's usually about art. But since the computers don't have those limitations when the demo scene started in the 80s, with C64 and all those computers, when on those computers a demo or intro was considered really cool if it could do something technical. It wasn't really about the looks of it and the music of it, because every C64 intro and demo had the same sounding music. I don't say they copied each other. I just only say that computer had only one set of sound chips. So even if the music was totally different, everything sounded the same because it didn't have a sound card. So you couldn't really make lifelike noises with it. The same goes for
Can imagine.
graphics because it was really limited. So you were considered a really cool cat in the demo scene if you could do something really insane like draw more pixels or floating dots on a screen than everybody else could, or try to animate a real 3D cube because the Commodore 64 wasn't designed for that. Even the Commodore's designers said they never imagined someone could draw a 3D object with it. But later on, then PCs came and 3D cards came and sound cards came. Not like that's a bad thing. I really enjoyed the first time I had a sound card, and the first time I saw a 3D graphics card. It was like the first time when I saw a computer. It was almost the same feeling. But anyway, now you don't really have those limitations because it's sky's the limit. The game companies started to brag about who could draw more polygons in their game, but after a certain a degree, it doesn't really matter because you can't even tell. So the demo sceners started making artificial limitations for themselves. So they invented new competitions where you have to force yourself into making a really small code. Like, there's a competition when you have to make a working game just under the size of 96 kilobytes. And those working games they usually have multiplayer features, stuff like that. And there are even smaller competitions. I mean, competitions with smaller size limits. Like there is one where you have to make a demo or intro with with only taking 64 kilobytes of space, and there is even one when you're only allowed to use 4 fucking kilobytes. 4 kilobytes. Let me tell you something. If you open a Microsoft Word document and don't even type a single letter in it, just open it and save it, it's gonna save all that crap in it without storing any letters. So it's gonna save just an empty document, and it's gonna take
blank space.
Yeah, formatted blank space. Yeah, exactly. And it's gonna be around 9 kilobytes, even if it's empty. And those guys can make a working executable program with music, graphics, sometimes 3D graphics with less than that. That's where the demo scene really shines.
Yeah.
I mean, I really enjoy with demos without these limitations if they are really awesome, if they have really cool music, and they're just good to look at because they are just like video clips for music videos or something. But the most badass intros and demos are like these ones. Back then, when they made games like this, they have to face the same limitations. The same goes for everybody knows Super Mario, right? When they first designed the character, it wasn't even called Mario, it was called Jumpman because it first appeared in Donkey Kong. But they only made him to wear a little hat because they couldn't animate a lifelike hair to it that looked like actual human hair, because it was very hard to draw something like that with that, with just using that many pixels. And of course, as always, the main character has to be the best looking sprite in the game. So they just slapped a hat on it. And the same goes for the mustache. Mario only has a mustache because it was hard to make a normal looking nose and the mouth, so they just drew him a really big nose and the mustache, and that's it. Another really funny thing that Lara Croft only has those large chests because that was actually an accident. And the guy who made Lara Croft's model, he just kinda had an accident and resized the breasts so it was awkwardly big, but they kept it because even if it was just a few polygons, it was not really lifelike. Sex sells, and Basically, they only made the main character a female anyway, because who wants to look at some guy's butt all the time?
Figures.
The same for Lemmings. I don't know if you guys remember the game Lemmings. Those bastards, those little things in the screen, just look at them. They're so small. I don't even know. You can probably count the pixels they are made of. It's around a dozen pixels only, each of them, and they still move so lifelike because they are so well animated. And same reason they have blue clothing and green hair, so you can distinguish the clothing and the hair. I don't know if you know about Lemmings. You probably don't, Wulong, because it's not a really recent game, even though it had a lot of spin-off games.
Had a chance to.
That was also a DOS game I played in primary school. That game would probably make people rage quit nowadays. Just like this one. This fucking game is so ridiculously hard. No, no!
How long have you been streaming, by the way?
I don't know. I kinda lost track of time. I was just talking with Fantas before you arrived.
Just over an hour.
He interviewed me. We talked about how we started playing with computers.
By the way, what was that? A big piece of cheese in the room?
Yep. That's totally real,
Yeah.
lifelike. There's a room with a huge piece of cheese in it. Eh.
And the light bulb.
I haven't shown you the map, the room which has a lot of dogs in it, and you have to eat the dogs' food without waking the dogs up. That's one of the hardest. As a kid, I always jumped out the window because I didn't want it to make that room. Also, these mice here, these are bastards. You can eat them, but if you're grabbing into those lines with clothes on them, they move above you, they're gonna release the cloth you're grabbing into it, and they're gonna push you down. Bastards. Just like Tom and Jerry. Dag. No!
Okay, we're back.
Curse you. You know what? I was really surprised when I saw that Twitch actually knows this game. Because sometimes I just want to stream a game and I can't set it up on Twitch because they don't have it on their database. But this game was in. I mean, I could pick it.
Someone was obviously a fan then.
Yeah, this.
There are ways to add stuff manually, but
Oh. Well, it was a cult game, a cult classic. So it's not really surprising. I wonder how many people tried to actually stream this before. Another thing that was really like magic for me when we first started playing multiplayer. And I'm not talking about sitting in the same room playing with two different controllers or even smashing the same keyboard, because when we played Mortal Kombat on a PC we used the same keyboard. I
Yeah.
played a lot with my little brother on the same keyboard. We binded the keys so they are on the different sides of the keyboard, but we still could punch each other while we were fighting on the screen. We actually fought each other in real life, so we drew off the enemy and we can have access to our own keys. But what I remember back then was that if you smash too many keys in the same time, it just overloaded the keyboard buffer. So instead of recognizing it, it just started be. Oh, this is the one I was talking about. Uh-oh. I'm out of here. No. Ugh. No! Damn it, broom.
That dog was nasty.
Yep.
Still can't get over the fact that the room kinda just lives its own life.
Well, it's almost like that Walt Disney cartoon with Mickey Mouse as a magician in it.
Hmm.
No! Ugh. Uh-oh. How do I even eat all these things? Never knew as a kid. Guess I'm never gonna. Oh. That's just my luck.
Dog
Ah,
looks like
yes.
he's masturbating.
What? What was that?
The dog, when it laughs at you, it looks like it's masturbating. If you look at its right paw.
Here,
you
here,
see
kitty. Uh-oh. Oolong was right, it is a nasty dog.
What's his game rating, by the way?
Games back then didn't have a rating,
Yeah,
you know.
I know, that's the truth.
That's why my father always told me to delete games from my computer, but because he didn't know how to, and he didn't know how to look it up if I actually deleted them, I always told him, yeah, father, I deleted them. And he made me delete Wolfenstein because it has swastikas in it. He made me delete Mortal Kombat because it was violent. The same for Doom. But I never deleted these games.
Yeah.
When I first started burning CDs and selling them, it wasn't even games that made me the most of the money. You can guess what it was.
Right.
Yeah. Let's just say they used it for the same reason as what the dog just did.
Are these puppies just randomly flying out the windows?
Sometimes I deliberately jump out the window if it's the room with the dogs, but most of the time
No, I mean
it
when you're outside, there are some things flying out the windows.
oh yeah, they're
Puppies.
they're throwing out shoes and phones at me. You ever heard cats and what kind of noise they make? You would probably throw out shoes as well.
Mm. In the place where I live, the dogs are more annoying.
I'm not talking about cats in general. I'm talking about when. How do you call that? You know, the
When
mating
they
season.
No.
basically when they start to scream. And
Yeah. Lucky for us, this game only has PC speaker support. These games never had music and sound in the same time because the big PC speaker couldn't utilize more channels, and I never understood why they felt the need to make this. I don't know if I can even call it music. These sound effects when you're inside the rooms. Because the intro music is okay. I actually like that. Oh. Okay, I think I just gonna call it a night because there's no game over in the game. You always start all over again, and you can't even finish the game. So I have to end it
It's another cycle.
sometime. Ah, no. Jeez, that was my favorite room as a kid. Even though I didn't see where the cat was because the cheese had the same shade as the cat. Yay! Okay. That's it, I guess. I gonna end the stream now.